Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today Kirk Herbstreit denies that he or ESPN have any favorable bias towards the SEC. So in this video here today, I'm going to be reacting to an interview that Kirk Herbstreit had on a podcast with Andy Staples and Ari Wasserman, where he talks about the perceived SEC bias that he and ESPN has. And this is going to be the longest solo video I've probably ever done on this channel. So we're going to timestamp it. So if you don't want to hear how we got to where we are today with this conversation, feel free to just go down to the description below, hit subscribe, hit like on your way down there, and then you can go to the timestamp and you can just jump forward to where you hear Kirk talk about this stuff. And I'll be reacting during the course of that interview. But first, I think it's important to kind of talk about how we got to where we are today, where we talk about ESPN having a strict SEC bias. Now, let's do the big picture thing right away. Does ESPN have an SEC bias? Of course they do. They pay hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars for the SEC. They want that product, that TV product, to be successful because they want to have good TV ratings and they want their money to be well spent. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. It's the same thing with Fox, by the way, too. Fox wants the Big Ten to succeed so that their TV ratings go up. It also doesn't take a genius to figure out that someone like Paul Feinbaum is an SEC homer because he was originally a radio host in Alabama. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that Nick Saban, who spent his entire or most of his coaching career in the SEC, is known as being an SEC coach, being the face of the SEC for dang near 2 decades. He is an SEC homer. But that doesn't mean necessarily every ESPN analyst, college football person is an SEC homer. People don't say this stuff about Desmond Howard. They don't say this stuff about Pat McAfee. But a lot of people, especially I think this is amplified a lot over the last 2 years, have been saying that specifically about Kirk Herbstreit. Now, we all know about the stuff last year with Florida State where he goes on Pardon My Take and he's saying that that he thinks Alabama should be in over Florida State. He thinks that they have a better chance of winning a national championship. Florida State fans freaked out. He responded to them on Twitter, and it became this whole big thing where he got a lot of criticism for, saying, hey, an SEC team should make it over a undefeated ACC champion. And a lot of people got mad at that. And it was kind of the argument too, was like, well, we can't leave an SEC team out. And I was always saying, like, can we? We can just not have them in. What's wrong with that? So anyway, fast forward to this year. Kirk Herbstreit notably said, I believe it was a few weeks or even a few months ago now at this point, he's like, hey, I have no opinions whatsoever on who should be in. He even left the college football selection show that ESPN would have I think they had it every Tuesday, if my memory's correct. He left that show. Was no longer doing, kind of taking himself out of being like as much of an opinionist, a take artist as he possibly could on this. But fast forward to the very first night of the college football playoff, where we have Notre Dame playing at home against Indiana, and Indiana does not play a competitive game for the most part. They have a little bit of a spark at the end. They're a 2-point conversion away from actually making it a 1-score game. But for the most part, Notre Dame, beat the crap out of them. And then Sean McDonough, the guy doing the color commentary on the broadcast, was talking about the game and basically saying, hey, Indiana didn't belong on the field tonight. Notre Dame is a much superior team for them, especially considering all of the other teams that might possibly could have made the playoff. Fast forward to the very next morning, and ESPN's broadcast throughout college game day, and even through a lot of the other broadcasts, was basically, hey, the playoff committee got this wrong. We are letting in the schools like Indiana and SMU, and they aren't even playing these competitive games in the playoff, while we should be having a lot of these other teams that could be giving better games. And this led Kirk Herbstreit going on College Game Day, I believe it was Saturday morning, and he had this to say about the Indiana-Notre Dame game.
The atmosphere was historic.
Yeah.
The game was not. And I'm not going to sit here and say, why was Indiana in? But Indiana, with what you guys like to talk about, they have 11 wins. They got to be one of the best teams. Indiana was outclassed in that game. They should not physically, it was not a team that should have been on that field when you consider other teams that could have been there. It's no knock on Indiana. They had a great year, but we've got to move forward with the playoff and hope that the committee does a better job of weighing who the best 12 are versus who's the most deserving, because by golly, they got 11 wins. They didn't beat anybody, but they got 11 wins. That's a bunch of BS. We need to find the best teams, and that's last night. It was incredibly evident just standing on that field and watching the game and the way it played out.
Yeah.
Now, again, in the interview I'll show you guys in a little bit, he goes on to like talk about what he was actually trying to say there. But again, if you just read what he said out there, he said they were outclassed and they shouldn't have been on that field, considering who else could have been in that game. Well, what do you think people think when you say that? When you say those exact words, considering who else could have been out there? Who was the first team left off out of the college football playoff this year? It was Alabama. Who were other teams that people were considering making the college football playoff? South Carolina and Ole Miss, other 3-loss SEC teams. Now, there was another part when they're talking about the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Shout out Iowa State, Pop-Tarts Bowl champions. Take that, Cam Ward. Where everyone picked Miami, by the way. Haha. Where Nick Saban was like, well, Miami could have been a team that should have been in the playoff. And Kirk Herbstreit kind of alluded to in that. It's like a 13-second clip. It's not worth me showing you that, like, hey, maybe I wasn't talking about an SEC team that deserved to be in. Maybe I was talking about Miami, which, okay. But then after College Game Day, we had a blowout with SMU Penn State. We have a closer game with Texas Clemson that I think people remember, where Clemson was actually like they turned the ball over on downs on the goal line, and if they would have actually gotten a touchdown there, they would have tied it if my memory's correct, and that would have been in the fourth quarter, a tie game. But even though as the day progressed, and we have our first SEC team playing in the playoff, which is Tennessee, and Ohio State boat races them, and it becomes the worst loss out of everyone in the playoff. And that kind of leads the conversation online. It's like, well, wait a minute. If you were looking at Indiana and their performance on the field and saying, hey, they didn't belong there, well, they actually had the closest loss out of anyone in day one. So Kirk Herbstreit, after he called Tennessee, Ohio State, he went on SportsCenter with Linda Cohn, and this is what he had to say.
Home teams won. They not only won, but they won by double digits. What is your biggest takeaway from this first weekend of the 12-team playoff?
That I hope next year the committee won't get caught up in what the social media and a lot of people who are fringe fans get caught up in, which is wins. They had 11 wins. They must be good. Who did they beat? I think is much more important than how many wins you have. That's old school way of approaching it. Indiana having 11 wins and beating nobody, that doesn't mean they're one of the 12 best teams. Remember, I know, Linda, I'm not taking this out on you, but there's a big difference between deserving and best.
Yeah.
What this is all about is giving us the best 12 teams. Now, it's subjective. How you want to figure out the best 12 is up to you. But that's what I want to see. I don't want to hear about wins. How many wins? Winning's obviously important, but just because you have 11 wins doesn't mean you're better than a team that maybe had a tougher road that had 9 wins. So I think we get too caught up in how many wins you have. It's really more about who are the best 12 teams, and we need to get the best 12 teams in this tournament every year.
It's a fantastic point, Kirk. Thanks for making it, and thanks for joining us on SportsCenter.
Okay, so there you have it. It's about getting the best 12 teams in. A lot of people also rightfully said, like, hey, like, well, Tennessee didn't prove that they're best 12 team. Same thing with every other team that lost there. Now, I want to point this out here because I was thinking about doing this after we did the interview to kind of talk about it. But if you're doing the thing where you're talking about, hey, who did you beat? What was your strength of schedule? The whole SEC argument. Well, did the playoff committee judge things differently this year than they had in previous years? Yes, they did. The playoff committee used to do it where it's like, hey, if you lost your conference championship game, more than likely you're not making the playoff, right? This happened to USC memorably a few years ago when they were 11-1, lost to Utah in the conference championship game. Obviously, it's a thing that happened a lot with the 14 playoff. Well, this year, obviously, a team like SMU loses, they get to keep their spot. So obviously the way that they judge it's a little bit differently for 12 teams than they did for 4 teams, but still the format and the alleged rules that they do to other than the automatic bids, everything else is the same format. So if you go back to 2017, and this is something I didn't know, and somebody tweeted this. It's Jack Grossman tweeted this as it pertained to Kirk Herbstreit and that take that he just spouted off there. This is what Kirk Herbstreit and the college football people at ESPN had to say in 2017. Kirk Herbstreit says, hold on, just want to make sure that was shared. Kirk Herbstreit, the losses matter. To lose that way, Ohio State to Iowa. No, okay, I guess I'll back up. So basically, this is what the argument was in 2017 for the college football playoff. And this is what the SEC people were saying in this whole playoff this year. It's like, well, we're not going to go and schedule tough out of conference games. We're not going to go and do that. Well, in 2017, Ohio State, if you guys remember, scheduled Oklahoma to play them out of conference. Oklahoma ended up having the Heisman Trophy winner in Baker Mayfield. They ended up going to the college football playoff, won the Big 12. They went into overtime with Georgia in the playoff. Very good team. Well, they lose to them, close game, out of conference, and then later in the season, they end up getting like boat raced by Iowa. But when you look at Ohio State, who won the Big Ten, they ended up going and winning the Big Ten. I think, if my memory is correct, they beat 12-0 Wisconsin that year in the Big Ten championship game. And they had multiple top 25 wins. Alabama, who was the 4 seed, who ended up getting into the playoff, was 11-1. They had 0 top 25 wins. The one top 25 team they played at the end of the season was Auburn, who beat them pretty handedly that year. So if you're doing that argument, hey, who did you play? What are your wins? That would mean you would think Ohio State should win. Well, this is what they had to say, as you can see on your screen right now. Kirk Herbstreit says, the losses matter. To lose that way, Ohio State lost to Iowa. It sent the message that the committee couldn't forget. Booger said, I am happy today because the 13 people in the room made a statement. The coaches in the room made a statement. Watching the film, the 4 best teams got in. It doesn't sound like it mattered what Ohio State did yesterday at all. That's after they beat Wisconsin. Wins and losses matter than resume. Alabama's resume is not even close to Ohio State. They are punishing Ohio State for losing 31 points to Iowa. The committee really is in love with Alabama. I'm not convinced Alabama is one of the top 4 teams in the country. I'm not convinced Alabama would have beaten Wisconsin this past weekend. Okay, so Jesse Palmer clearly taking the SEC take here, or the current day SEC take here of like, hey, what's your resume? Kirk Herbstreit, on the other hand, is saying, no, the fact that you got destroyed by Ohio State in this case, got destroyed by Iowa means you're disqualified, especially when there's a better candidate, quote unquote, ahead of you. So when you look at that, what Kirk Herbstreit said there, looks like a hypocrite, right? Well, now I will finally get to the interview of what Kirk Herbstreit had to say about all of this stuff pertaining this year's playoff in Indiana and all of that stuff now. In this interview now, as I'm going to share the screen now, but his take in this interview is more similar to the 2017 take than it is to the the first 2 clips that I showed you. So we'll go ahead. I will play this clip for you guys. We finally got here at like 14 minutes in this. I'm sorry it took this long, but I do think having that preface of all that stuff was more important. So here is what Kirk Herbstreit said with Andy and Ari on 3. I'm also going to play this at like 1.25 speed, just so you guys know at home. So that way we can kind of like bust through this a lot quicker than we, make this video not like 50 minutes long. But this is going to be like probably like 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes.
And one last thing, when I was talking about Indiana, it was a bad example because I didn't have enough time. Don't take an SEC team. Take another Big Ten team. As an example, if Indiana, who had a great year this year, but they didn't play a whole lot of great teams. I mean, if you went down the Big Ten at the top and Ohio State's up there, they obviously didn't
if 2025 is the year you achieve your wellness goals, having Whoop at
Oregon. No, they didn't play Oregon. Or they must have played Penn State. No, they didn't play Penn State. Or they must have played Minnesota. No, they didn't play. Or they must have played Iowa. No, I mean, you have to go all the way down. Michigan was the one team, but everybody else was at the bottom of the Big Ten on top of their non-conference. And my point wasn't to pick on them. They just had a magical year. My point was, let's say you had a 9-3 Iowa as a discussion. And Iowa that year went to Columbus. They went to Penn State. They went to Ann Arbor. They went to Eugene. And they went to Madison. For whatever reason, they had 5 brutal road games in the Big Ten. And somehow, Kirk Ferentz got those guys to 9-3. I guess this is what my point was. Just because we get these teams that get to 11 or 12 wins, and you got a team like Iowa that's sitting there at 9-3, and they went to those 5 road games I mentioned. I'm just saying, let's have a discussion on, is it automatically that you get to 11 wins so you automatically get in? Or should Iowa at 9-3 be looked at and say, oh my God, they went to Columbus at night. They went to Penn, like all the way that entire list of teams. That's brutal. And if the answer everyone's going to say is no, too bad, 11 wins is better, then what we're going to get to, if strength of schedule isn't a big part of this, where you play and when you play, if that's not going to be a part of this, then what we're going to get to is everybody's going to just basically dumb down the non-conference and play as easy of a schedule as you can and try to just get to those 11 or 12 wins. So by the way, I'm not saying Indiana wasn't one of the best teams. I'm just saying I felt like the logic behind them getting in was 11 wins. And I guess my only thing on that is look in your own conference as an example. Take Iowa, take Nebraska, take Illinois, whoever, and imagine them playing some 4 or 5 really tough road games and getting to a 9-3. I mean, you could make an argument, I feel like, for a team with a really tough schedule that still got to 9 wins. That was all I was really saying, or at least have a discussion about it. I didn't mean that's on me for pointing to Indiana and using them without giving further information to what
Okay, so I'll interject here because they're going to talk about this a little bit more. He's right there. If there was a better team, like for example, if Alabama's only losses were to like 3 teams in the playoff, plus they went out of conference and then like also had like some very good quality wins, and you just look at their losses and is like, hey, these guys have really quality losses, and if they just had an easier schedule, we should reward this team for playing 6 ranked teams or something like that. The only problem is, and they're going to talk about this, there wasn't that team. There wasn't that team. And the fact that you didn't preface that and say like, well, in future years, and you preface it, hey, in future years, if there is a 2025's version of Indiana and they have 11 wins and they had like an easier road and easier schedule than like a 9-3 team, even if it is in the Big Ten that had a road loss to Oregon and Ohio State and to Penn State, but then they also have 3 really solid wins and were really good, then that team should go in. I think that's reasonable. I think that's rational, right? But the way that he said it in those first 2 clips did not make it look like he was saying that whatsoever, and that's what they're going to talk about here.
Explanation is actually much nicer than mine, Kirk, because Ari and I had this argument on the show, and I said, if you're just going to do it based on the loss column, Ari, it's all your fault we're getting shitty games in the future because you just made a bunch of ADs go, I'm going to create the crappiest schedule.
Well, how many ADs I've heard from when Indiana got in was, I'm never scheduling a tough game again, and that was kind of that knee-jerk reaction of frustration. But FIU, Western Illinois, Charlotte, those kind of games were scheduled way back when Indiana's just trying to get the 6 wins and go to a bowl game. We get all that. But I guess
again, too, though, and Ari's going to like say, or kind of allude to this too, the thing about like the 11 wins, like it does matter who you play, but we didn't have that other team in that discussion. And also too, going back to the old rules or the old format of the college football playoff, in that format, it did matter. It did matter, the win-loss column. I brought you guys up the Ohio State example where they had a better resume, and a conference championship, by the way, and they got in over an Alabama team that didn't have much of a resume. The year before, Penn State was the 5 seed. They won the Big Ten. They got left out over Ohio State, who they beat head to head. So in those 2 examples, and in every other year that we did it, except for last year, the record has mattered. So, and I think that's kind of like my big picture thing when I was talking about this online. You need to be consistent. You can't flip-flop each year and be like, oh, well, this year record matters. Oh, no. This year strength of schedule matters. Oh, no, this year resume matters. You can't flip-flop on that stuff. And that's kind of why people were hammering Kirk, was because it seemed like he was doing that.
We're saying is let's respect these teams that are willing to play in these late August, early September games, and you're playing a heavyweight from the Big Ten or wherever, and the Big Ten SEC play together. Those are fun games. What was it last year? LSU and USC. I know they ended up not being great teams, but those are great games. We want those games as college football fans. The players want those games, right? We don't want to just see chalk in those first 3 or 4 weeks. So that's really what I was trying to say. And like I said, that's on me if I didn't do a better job of explaining that. And I didn't mean to come down on Indiana. I was really looking more at their 11 wins and their schedule. And let's not poo-poo teams that really get tested and get to 9 wins. Sometimes getting to 9 wins and having the schedule you had, that's a pretty hilarious, pretty impressive effort to get to those 9 wins.
Kirk, you might not have meant to, but when that entire argument was the SEC, like that was like point one for every, like SEC's like South Carolina schedule. They were 9-3. They played a tougher schedule. Bama.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is like, I agree to a certain extent, but the SEC is rewarded already. And teams that play tougher schedules are rewarded. Like if there were a 10-2 team in the Big Ten that had that schedule, they would have gone over Indiana. If Alabama,
Indiana wouldn't have made it at 10.
You're seeing my Iowa example, not the SEC.
Right. Or if there was a 10-2 Big Ten team that had 4 tough road games and lost 2, then the 10-2 team would probably go, because the committee has already shown that they value
they did last
quality
year.
wins. Yeah. So like that, to me, it's like, you're right. Like I'm with you, but I think Indiana going was also a result of a devoid of another option. Like it's not like another team.
You're right.
There was another team out there that was 10-2.
There you go. 100% right. 100% right. And that's why they were in. But again, going back to those first 2 clips, why were people mad? Kirk Herbstreit didn't say that. He didn't say that. He said they didn't deserve to be on the field with Notre Dame. They didn't deserve to be in. But what happens when there's not a better option? What happens when there's not a better option? What happens when there's not a better resume? We just put other teams in because of the benefit of the doubt? That's the SEC argument.
And had 4 top 10 wins that got left out because Indiana.
Well, Alabama had no shot. Alabama had, I don't know how, if people thought I thought Alabama, I was very clear leading up to it. How can you put Alabama in when they went and lost? Not only lost, they got embarrassed by a 6-6 Oklahoma team. So they really weren't in it. South Carolina lost to Alabama and Ole Miss. It really wasn't, I'm with you. It wasn't like another team that anybody was like hitting the desk for, like, this team has to be in. I didn't.
Except for the dude that's 2 chairs away from you every single college game day that coached at Alabama. That was a guy that was banging the drum. Paul Feinbaum was throwing hissy fits every single day. So there were other people doing it, just maybe not Kirk. And maybe that's kind of like the biggest criticism. If you take it what he's saying here at face value, it's like at best it's a cop-out. When you're going on TV and saying like, hey, Indiana doesn't deserve to be in. We need a better team in. We need to find the best 12 teams. And then you don't give another option. That's a cop-out. That's a cop-out. You're just saying they don't deserve to be in. It's like, okay, take it to the next step. Take it to the next step. What's the next thing that you say after that? No. They didn't deserve to be in. So does that mean that Notre Dame gets a bye? No. You say they didn't deserve to be in. If you're going to say that, that means you think that someone else should have been in, because that's the way this works, right? That's what this is the system that we all agree to.
Say that. I don't know who. South Carolina would have been the only team that you could have said, let's look at this team, just because of the way they've kind of righted the ship. They got healthy and they've been playing good football near the end. They beat Clemson at the end. I mean, you could at least have a discussion about them. I don't know. Was there anybody out of the Big 12 or?
Check this out. I'm going to show you how I.
Okay, I'll mute that while he's saying that. He's talking about the Big 12 there. You could make like the argument for like BYU, because like BYU beat SMU, who was in the playoff. They had a quality loss against the Big 12 champion, and then they lost to Kansas in kind of like a close fluky game. But Kansas went on a stretch there where they were just destroying everyone atop the Big 12, including my team, by the way, which I'm still very, very upset about. Also, too, people were also saying that like, oh, well, Miami should have been in over Indiana or SMU or whatever. It's like, well, Miami, and guys, I do a lot of preseason work on college football. I could have told you before the season. I did a video with Locked On Canes, Alex Dono, who covers Miami daily. And we were talking about before the season, it's like, hey, Miami is a really good shot to make the playoff this year, not only because they have a really good team, but they have an easy schedule. We knew it before the season Indiana was going to have an easy schedule. We knew before the season SMU was going to have an easy schedule. You know how it shook out with Texas this year? They didn't play a ranked team until they played Clemson. Or excuse me, they didn't beat a ranked team until they beat Clemson. So again, some of the stuff with the schedule I get, but also sometimes you can't control it, and that's kind of what they start talking about here.
Not with quality wins, not with quality wins that were propping them up. And the reason why Alabama was in the discussion is because Bama beat Georgia. So, I think Alabama, illustrated something that Indiana was unable to illustrate this year, which is the ability to beat a team that's in the top 10.
But losing to Oklahoma, to me, just put a red X through them.
And if they wouldn't have lost to Oklahoma, then they would have had the 10-2 record.
I think it
would have been fine. There's nobody, you're right. And what you're saying is correct. The problem is that the entire SEC conglomerate of people were using this as a way to say, well, the teams that are 9-3 in the SEC played a tougher schedule, so they should have gone in. And if you do that, then you're telling Indiana, who, they played a crappy non-conference schedule, but they also played in the Big Ten this year, and that's just how they're scheduled. Like, they played the two teams that played for the national championship last year, and both ended up stinking. Like, how is that their fault?
Right.
You can't penalize teams for going 11-1 because they had a crappy schedule in the Big Ten. Because then at that point, it's like, okay, well, if you're just going to throw Alabama in there, then what the hell is Indiana's?
And that's the thing about this discussion is I'm an easy guy to talk to. Like, everything you're saying to me, 100% agree with.
Same.
It wasn't. I think what happened was Linda Cohn caught me after I did a Thursday night game in LA with the Rams, flew red-eyed into South Bend. We did a 4.5-hour show for leading up to Indiana Notre Dame, flew through the night to do Columbus, called the game. And then as I'm about to finally take my headset off, hey, Linda Cohn and Sports Center need you. And you're just like, okay, all right, I got it. Okay. And then ask me questions. And again, I'm not making excuses, but I'm just saying I had I had a little edge to me that I don't normally have, just because I just want to go home and go to bed. And when she just said that, I was probably a little bit edgier than I would normally be. But everything you're saying, I agree with. All right. And there wasn't a team. There was an option.
To the point of the there being no other option. Pardon me. My dog just got up and freaked me out. To the point of him in that schedule that he said, that actually kind of makes sense for why he was like a little bit testy that night, where he's in basically doing like 3 flights in 3 days, all of them overnight. His sleep schedule's probably screwed up. I don't know about you guys. Sometimes I have trouble like sleeping during the day sometimes. So maybe he had like a total of like 6 hours of sleep, and all of us all day online were probably consuming all of that content about like SEC this and Big Ten this and deserving that and yada, 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 yada. And Kirk was probably just like prepping for the game, doing stuff with College Game Day, trying to rest, trying to recover, just being a person. And again, if you believe him that he's not on Twitter, he didn't realize that maybe the entire country outside of like 2 schools was like incredibly PO'd at him. So I do buy that. If you don't buy that, I understand that.
A, B, C, and D this year. And I don't know if that's.
I think you unintentionally just echoed the SEC propaganda, though.
Well, no, but I didn't say anything about an SEC team. I didn't say anything.
It just sounded like it. It just sounded like what they were saying. That's why.
I think people just project that now that the business side, because you obviously don't control the business. Like you're not Burt Magnus or Jimmy Pitaro. Like you're not making the contracts.
Right.
But I do think now that ESPN, you have the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12, and the Big Ten's on other networks, and I think people just project that onto you now.
I'm telling you, I'm trying to. I don't know if I can stand up with lights. I'm telling you right now, I've never in 29 years had anybody from ESPN, and I've never witnessed it. Hey, you know who pays the bills? Make sure you get the SEC's back. Like, I've never ever.
Nobody does that. Like when I was in Sports Illustrated, people were like, I'm sure your editors tell you have to write about this.
Andy,
Never, not once.
He's talking to 2 people who work at the New York Times or work at the New York Times in the middle of an election cycle. Like, we get it, bud. Like, we're with you.
I'm just telling you, I don't know what everyone else's experience is. All I do is this, like you guys do.
Is that the Ravens and the Steelers chart, or is that a Texas Ohio State?
This is Ravens Bengals from like week 11, maybe. I'm not sure what week it was.
Oh, the last time you had them. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just looking back. I keep all my boards, so I'm just starting to look at that. And before I talked to you, I was watching Ravens a little bit. But my point is, I've never in my life had somebody say, hey, you need to go. We have a deal now with the SEC, so you need to be pro SEC. Never in my life. It never even I don't even know who's in what league anymore. It never even occurs to me. Honestly, I watch the teams, and if truth be known, I'm a Big Ten guy.
Part of that too, where he's talking about like the influence. Now, is there like some sort of like conspiracy theory where it's like that blatant, where someone is going up to like Kirk and be like, hey, you have to go out there and push the Alabama propaganda. You must say that Alabama. No. These are real human beings. They have real opinions. And that's kind of like if you do the politics thing, that's like, it's like when somebody makes like a major campaign donation to somebody, they aren't saying like, hey, do all of this like corrupt stuff for me. I'm paying you $50 million or whatever. So when you get in office, whatever position that be, you do things for me and you do corrupt stuff for me and you rig it in my favor. That's not how that works. But there is kind of like a wink and a nod to it. It's not like just blatant corruption. And I think you could make the argument that that's probably something, or maybe something that happens with the ESPN SEC, or even again, like we said earlier, Fox Big Ten, where maybe they are like, hey, geez, who would really be fun to watch go to South Bend? Alabama. Maybe one of these teams, maybe the team that we saw beat Georgia, maybe be even that aloof to it, and maybe you're just doing that and you just drop that in a little bit of a discussion and that nugget gets put in your head. You can make that argument. That's another thing where it's like, I'll let you guys think whatever you want about that. I could see it maybe being a little less like over the top, like hammer to nail, like the example they're saying here. I could see that, but if they don't do it at all, I could also see that too. And then Kirk Herbstreit's going to say something here, which kind of gets to the root of what people were really and actually mad about with him here. And this is the other part of this that went mega viral. Okay, so I actually had to do a little bit of editing here, guys. The next part I was going to show you isn't actually the part I thought it was going to be, but it's okay. They only went on to like talk about Kirk Herbstreit's like, I'm a Big Ten guy, bro, blah, 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 blah. And then they start talking about College Game Day. But there's one other part in this interview here that they had that I wanted to show you guys, because this kind of gets to the root of all of the things that people are really mad about Kirk Herbstreit and kind of like this college football elitist point of view. So I'll go ahead, I'll play this last little minute stretch here, and then I'll give you my thoughts on everything, and then we'll kind of wrap up this long video here today. So here we go. Here's Kirk Herbstreit talking about how actually this Final Four that we have now is the best case scenario possible for ESPN.
Let me straighten the record on one last thing. The ESPN loves the SEC so much that we could not have paid for a better Final Four with Notre Dame and Ohio State and Penn State and Texas. The only one missing is Michigan. If you could somehow wedge Michigan in, so like this idea that we want Alabama and Texas A&M and Auburn, are you kidding me? Like, if you're asking us who we would want, we'll take Ohio State every year, Notre Dame. Like, this is a ratings bonanza. So if you're going to accuse us of anything, you should accuse us of wanting Ohio State, wanting Notre Dame, and these big brands. If you knew anything about ratings, that's who you want. You don't want these small little Clemsons and small little Southern schools when it comes to cheering for ratings. Ratings are big, massive Big Ten brands. That's what ratings are.
And Notre Dame, who either people love or hate. Yeah.
If you get Ohio State, Notre Dame in the national championship, you think we're going to be like, doggone it, if we could only gotten a couple good brands in the championship. Just didn't work out this year.
Okay, so little does Kirk know, the people that were mad at you, the people that were, furious at you, the people that have changed their opinion on you probably for the rest of their lives aren't Ohio State fans, aren't the Penn State fans. I mean, there's probably some, but really it's the little guy. It's the fans of all the Big 12 schools, of all the ACC schools, because what you were saying there and what you were trying to imply and what Nick Saban was trying to apply was, no, screw all of the little guys. Let's look at 24/7 sports recruiting rankings, and let's look at Mel Kiper's NFL draft mock board, and that's how we're going to decide who are the top 12 teams. That's why people were mad, because we feel like we're supposed to have this 12-team playoff now. And there's some schools that even in a 4-team playoff thought we had 0% chance of making it every single year. Florida State last year goes 13-0. It's one of the best seasons in their school's history. Finally resurrects their program from the Jimbo Fisher era. Now it obviously fell back down into the toilet this year, but they had one of their best years ever. Don't make the playoff for a big brand Alabama. And that's why people were upset. It's not just an SEC thing, even though I can't remember if I showed this part or not, but Kirk says like, hey man, we Big Ten people, like SEC people treat us like second-class citizens. Well, what do you think they treat Big 12 fans like? What do you think they treat ACC fans like or Mountain West fans? They think we're all G5 schools now. That's what they think. That's why people were mad, because it's the haves and the have-nots. And my overwhelming point that I have 2 more points I want to make, because all of us freaked out about the 12-team playoff, and we're freaking out about all of these blowouts. But we all have the freaking memory of a goldfish. I'll go ahead and show you guys this post that I retweeted and quote tweeted, but I'll show you what the substance of what of why I retweeted it. So Heather Dinich tweets, as I mentioned on Get Up, ESPN, the lopsided first round results were not an anomaly. According to ESPN research, 60% of college football playoff games over the past decade were decided by at least 3 touchdowns, and 20 of the 30 college football playoff games were decided by double digits, and they were blue blood beatdowns. I quote tweeted that because I did a bunch of research just of the national title games that we've had since I'm going back to the late 90s at this point. 12 of the last 26 national title games were decided by 3 scores or more as well. Also, to add on that too, 2 of those national title games were 16-point games, so they're 1 point away from being more than half of our title games being blowouts. Guys, that's the nature of the sport. Sometimes there's a snowball effect that happens in the sport, and it's just kind of an avalanche that takes over the course of a big time game, even if it is a really good team or 2 really good teams playing each other or 2 great teams playing each other. We're not going to get Texas, USC 2005 every single year. That's the anomaly. That's the outlier. Most of the time, or more than half the time, or even about half the time, we're going to get lopsided games. That's just the sport. That's just the nature of the sport. And the big picture thing about ESPN here and their coverage, now I think it's gotten better as the playoff has progressed, but at the beginning, that first day and a half, it was just bashing the product, bashing the little guy, just taking a freaking sledgehammer to it. Not every single fan of college football, not 90% of fans in college football are Ohio State fans or Texas fans or Georgia fans or all the big brands. There's a lot of little guys out here that watch the sport too. And how do you think they feel that Indiana has their best season ever and they're getting told for 48 hours how they didn't belong to be in the playoff, and then they're seeing other teams get their cheeks clapped worse than they did? Indiana, by the way, played Ohio State better than Tennessee did, and then all of the people that were saying Indiana didn't belong are mute when Tennessee gets blown. It's like, wait a minute, you can't have it both ways. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And my final point on all of this stuff here too is when we're talking about the 12-team playoff and the future of it, we're taking ourselves so seriously when it comes to this stuff. We're making grand judgments out of every single game, every single quarter, every single time we have a playoff bracket. And it's like, oh my God, Penn State got this easy path this year. Oh my God, Oregon got screwed with their playoff bracket. Guys, in college basketball, it's way worse because they try to strategically have the brackets laid out where they have the best matchups. As someone that follows college basketball a lot, and I'm watching all of the games leading up to the tournament, and I'm trying to figure out before it even starts, all right, who's this nice 12 seed that I want to pick, maybe go to the Sweet 16. Oh wait, my favorite 12 seed's going against my favorite 5 seed. Crap. So let's just relax on some of this stuff. And kind of my overall point here with Herbstreet is, does he have an inherent SEC bias? Well, if you listen to that interview which I just showed you, I would say no. But does that mean I'm just going to sit here and be like, oh, Kirk Herbstreit's like, fair and everything when it comes to that stuff? Because overall, I do think that like what he said in that interview is kind of like what all of us expect about Kirk Herbstreit. And that's the type of person that wouldn't have said those things that he said on College Game Day and then on Sports Center, talking about Indiana in the first place. So I'm willing to have an open-mindedness about it. But you guys at home, you can, make your own opinion up. I completely understand if you're like, no, screw this guy. He hates us. He hates all the bottom guys. He hates the little guys. And I think that interview was smug, and he knows what he's doing, and he didn't actually tweet his Twitter account or delete his Twitter account. If you think that stuff, I won't blame you, but I'm willing to have more open-mindedness to it, and I'm going to address it with a little bit more skepticism with Kirk. So, yeah, there you have it. It's been like 40-something minutes recording this video here for you guys today. This took a lot of work, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope we get a decent amount of views on this video. And again, hit that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. That's how I know that you guys actually like this content. And if you like this content, I will make more content like this because I like doing this. So again, please leave a comment, subscribe, check out other videos on the Sports Detective Podcast channel page, and we'll talk to you next time. Thank you for watching.